Yes, hello again, welcome back to your number one and possibly your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel, where of course we try and continue to take a look at more of those old school vintage race bikes from back in the day when the sport, of course, at that time was called scrambling. Now, as our 2022 classic racing season almost comes to a close here in the UK, we will still try our very best to keep you entertained through the winter months by showcasing many more of these old school vintage race bikes. So if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then now would be a very good time to do that in order that you don't miss out on future postings from my channel. And of course, that way you will join the almost 16,000 subscribers that we already have here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. So right now we're going to take a look at another British built bike. Now this machine here is not exactly a fully blown original bike from that particular period, but nevertheless it's certainly worth a look here on my CDB Classic Dirt Bike channel. So without any further delay, let's jump right into the video and take a look at this 1979 520 CCM replica. Now, I may be a little bit biased here, but I have to say that these older British-made CCM 4-stroke thumpers, for me personally, have to be among some of the best-looking vintage motocross bikes on the planet. There's just something about these bikes with their chrome chassis, their gold tanks, and of course that big single-cylinder B50 BSA motor. Of course, many of the CCM bikes that you see taking to the motocross tracks in these modern times are not normally the big stock original machines that the great Alan Clews built all those years ago. Although having said that, there still are a few original examples out there and still racing occasionally, but these days those are very few and far between. Which brings us to our featured bike, and it's because of the old original CCMs that are fast becoming rarer with each passing year that there's now quite a vibrant market for building reproduction CCM bikes and parts. And our featured example here is a bike that was initially built by Ian Stainton some years ago using a reproduction chassis and parts that nowadays are quite easily available if you're in the market to buy or even build your own version of one of these Alan Clews classics. Now, if you just happen to be one of those very lucky people that have an original 1970s model of CCM tucked away in your garage or workshop, then without doubt you have a very good investment there for the future, because original bikes and even original CCM parts are now very rare and only increasing in value as the years roll by. But of course, if you're not lucky enough to be part of that elite group, an alternative is just to get yourself a hold of one of these modern day CCM frame kits and then gather together all of the other associated reproduction parts that you'll need, and then just build yourself your very own Alan Clews CCM replica bike. And so as we begin with the bike's chassis, which is more or less an exact copy of a 1979 original chassis from that year, and these superbly engineered frames are all built by Joe Maxwell Engineering in Thornhill in Dumfries in Scotland. And these pictures here are just a few of the customers' frames that Joe Maxwell had on display at the recent Drumlandrig Festival off-road weekend in June of 2022. Now, the frames are all constructed from high-quality T45 steel tubing, which Joe Maxwell then shapes into your particular model of CCM. And these are all then given a coating of chrome plating as of course that the original frames had in the 1970s. But without doubt, these are very top quality items, and as I said, more or less a carbon copy of the original Alan Clews chassis from 1979. But if you need any more information on these frame kits and other CCM parts, then it's well worth taking a look at Joe Maxwell's website at this address. And so as we move on to the motor on our 79 bike, which is a 2-valve BSA B50 4-stroke 520 cc power plant, and once more this engine was built by Ian using as many of his spare B50 engine parts that he had lying around his workshop. Now, during the construction of this motor, this engine barrel was a major find for Ian, because this particular barrel here, Ian told me, had been sitting around in a workshop since 1995, unused. So that was certainly a great find and a major part in this motor's construction. Now, once again, the engine's crankshaft and most of the motor's internals were supplied by PES, or Performance Engineering Services in South Yorkshire in the UK, who are still regarded as one of the world's top suppliers for everything relating to these B50 BSA engines. And as far as I'm aware, this clutch cover here is also a remanufactured part, because as I said, original stock CCM engine components aren't exactly very common these days, but you can certainly see the ingenuity of the late Alan Clews when he designed these footrest hangers as part of the engine casings rather than having them bolted onto the frame. And these footrests also are upgrades from the much skinnier items that would have been fixed to these casings in 1979, and these Trials Raptor foot pegs are naturally much wider than the CCM stock items, and they will offer the rider a lot more support for his motocross boot. Now, as you'd expect, the motor's exhaust is a custom-made item with a big bore header pipe and a rather short, stubby, straight-through tailpiece coming out the side here. And this exhaust system here was manufactured by Racing's UK, who make all types of exhaust systems for all makes and models of road and off-road motorcycles. And once again, Racing's are quite a good contact if you need a pipe or maybe other exhaust services for your old classic bike. And although this is a quite basic and relatively easy enough pipe to design and manufacture, it's still very high quality and every bit as good as the CCM Clews originals. And of course, when that big B50 motor gets fired up, there's a lovely brap from this tailpipe. Now, as you know, way back in the day, this engine's lubrication oil would have been housed in the bike's frame with just a simple gauze type filter at the bottom of the chassis that you could then remove and clean after each race event. Very similar to the one that you can see here in this short clip. Although on our particular bike, Ian's opted for the much better upgrade on his CCM by fitting this external cartridge type oil filter system, which is a much better option than the stock design, and it doesn't take a huge amount of effort to plumb in. It's just a mounting bracket for the filter and a few high pressure hoses, and you're almost good to go. Although I have to say, for a motor that started its life as just a simple 500 four-stroke engine, and then Alan Clews worked his magic and then changed what was essentially a pretty dull road bike engine into a fully blown four-banger competition power plant that was more than capable of taking on anything that the Japanese had in the 1970s, and more often than not, these bikes were beating them on racetracks all over Europe and beyond. Now, you'd certainly be forgiven if you thought that these front forks on our 79 replica were original CCM units, because, to be fair, from a distance, they do look like they're the real deal from that year, although in actual fact these are not stock CCM forks, but are a pair of suspension units taken from a 1986 CR250 Honda, although I have to say that they do look the part on our CCM, and to the untrained eye they could certainly be passed off as pucker CCM items. And once again, the top and bottom triple clamps or yokes are also from that very same 1986 Honda CR250 bike, but nevertheless I'll wager that these more modern Honda forks will certainly do at least as good a job, if not a better one, than the stock factory fitted Clews competition machine suspension units. Now, back in 1979, CCM I think would have bolted on a pair of replica hubs to the front and rear wheels on this model, and as I remember, they also had magnesium backplates as well. But you're never going to find original CCM hubs for these bikes nowadays, because they're even rarer than a politician's promise. So Ian's substituted those very rare items for these hubs from PES, or Performance Engineering Services, and also these PES front and rear hubs have been relaced onto these gold coloured alloy Acront rims with brand new heavy duty stainless steel spokes. And again, we have quite a substantial rear drive sprocket, which is made of alloy and is a 56 tooth radialite part that's been supplied by Talon here in the UK. And so as we move on to the back end of our Clews CCM, we have a very nice pair of Swedish built Olin piggyback suspension units, which is a major upgrade to the British made Girling units that probably would have been fitted on this bike back in 1979, although without question these Olins are top quality parts and are a perfect match for that Honda front end, and these Swedish Olins can be custom tuned to the rider's weight and riding style, and of course they're all fully rebuildable for any servicing or tuning that you may need to carry out. Now, once more, the bike's fuel tank, I'm assuming, is a remanufactured part and a carbon copy of the stock CCM original tank from '79, and this design of fuel cell would often be painted in this lovely gold colour, or sometimes even in black, or certainly red in '79, and on other CCM models it may just have been left as a simple polished alloy. But once again, stock original tanks are very hard to come by these days, but it's thanks to these modern day engineers who are still reproducing them to keep these bikes still on the racetrack. Although, to be fair, these repo fuel tanks are so well made these days that they're almost indistinguishable from the Clews factory parts of the 1970s. Now the bike's seat base, foam and seat cover are all parts that were supplied by Keith Barnes at Cumbria Classic Mouldings, which conveniently abbreviates to CCM, surprisingly, but Keith certainly supplies many of these parts and all of the plastics that you would need, including front and rear mudguards and these side panels and airboxes as well. So Keith's yet another very good contact for these reproduction CCM fixtures and fittings. So if you think you could use some of Keith's parts on your next CCM build, then just drop him a message at his email address below. And so as we move on to the business end of our CCM, we have a pair of modern style rental handlebars with that CCM bar pad across the top. Now all of the control cables are, as you'd expect, brand new, and we also have a decent gasser throttle twist grip there with what looks like a good quality set of Magura levers and their associated rubber lever covers as well. Again, Magura items on the clutch side as well, with the addition of an engine kill switch just in case of any problems with that BSA B50 motor, in that it may need to be shut down in some kind of emergency. Now, on the day that I took these pictures, Ian also told me that there was a certain amount of titanium fasteners used on the build of this bike. So even although this particular CCM replica is not a rare original machine from '79, there's no disputing the fact that it's all been put together using some top quality motorcycle parts. And as far as I'm aware, Ian's now sold this bike to a brand new owner in order that he could finance more CCM build projects in the future. And I now believe that Ian's riding a Clews stroker machine these days, which, as you know, were the very first bikes that Alan Clews ever built, and that was a year before he registered and started the company Clews Competition Machines. But as far as I'm aware, when Ian did race this bike, he said it did have plenty grunt and handled exceptionally well for a remanufactured machine. But whether you agree with these kind of replica reproduction machines or not, you have to remember that many of the original CCM motorcycles are now becoming thin on the ground these days, and those stock factory bikes from way back in the day are usually all tucked up nice and cosy in private collections these days because of their increasing rarity. But it's thanks to the likes of Joe Maxwell Engineering and many others who are now manufacturing modern versions of these old original parts that we can all get a little glimpse of what it was actually like to hear and see one of these fantastic four-stroke thumpers take to the racetracks once again. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that walk around Ian Stainton's 1979 520 CCM bike. As I said, not a fully original bike, but original CCMs from back in the 1970s are becoming very, very hard to find these days, and they're even harder to see one actually racing on the track. But that remanufactured bike there of Ian's was certainly worth a look here on CDB TV. So coming up next here on my channel, we're going to take a look at a bike that is very seldom featured, and we're going to put that right with this next posting. So as we take a look at this 1974 awesome Phantom 250. Now this bike belongs to Gary War, and this bike is not a fully original machine from that period, of course, but nonetheless it's going to be worth a look here on my channel, and we will throw in another example of one of these rare Ossa Phantoms as well. So I do hope you'll return to take a look at both of these bikes in my next video posting here on CDB TV. But until then, of course, everybody out there, continue to be safe and well when you're riding those old vintage dirt bikes, and I hope to see you back here again very soon so we can talk about more of this old school vintage iron right here on your #1 and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.